Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. After 5 years in captivity, Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl is out of harm's way.
He wasn't forgotten by his country because the United States of America does not ever leave our men and women in uniform behind.
Bowe Bergdahl of Haley, Idaho, was captured in Afghanistan in June of 2009 when he was 23 years old. He appeared in a series of propaganda videos released by the Taliban while he was in captivity, which showed his declining health over time and desperate desire to be released.
Please bring me home. Please. Bring me home.
Bowe Bergdahl is now recovering at a U.S. military hospital in Germany. On Saturday in Washington, his father, Bowe Bergdahl, addressed his son in Pashto, a language spoken in Afghanistan.
I'd like to say to Bowe right now, who's having trouble speaking English, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Zayabayem. I'm your father, Bowe.
The news the lone American prisoner of war in Afghanistan had been freed is the sort of news you would expect to be met with unanimous exuberance, congratulations, and celebration. That has not been the case.
This whole exchange is shocking to me, and I'm very disappointed.
The terms of the deal are very troubling.
If you are trading 5 known bad guys, terrorists, for the soldier, you have just told terrorists in the world and the Taliban, we can tell you now how to get your people out of Gitmo. It's take an American soldier.
It is disturbing that these individuals would have the ability to re-enter the fight.
It could be worse. Like Obama, the Taliban might have wanted everyone out of Gitmo. We're lucky they only got 5.
We negotiated with these guys. They're terrorists. They're terrorists, and we negotiate with terrorists. So all that BS about we don't do that, we clearly do that.
This is kind of playing out much like Benghazi. They feel that they can just do whatever they feel. Doesn't matter what the law says.
It says in the law you have to notify Congress.
Well, this president has a reputation, I think well-deserved, of deciding which laws he's going to enforce and which laws he's not going to enforce.
Conservatives have rushed to the microphones to claim the president has put the country at risk by making a deal with the Taliban to release 5 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay in exchange for Bergdahl, a move they call illegal because it was done without the approval of Congress. Those prisoners have been released to the country of Qatar, which is the country that helped negotiate the deal. But the release of those prisoners is not the only target of criticism. There's also been plenty of criticism of Bergdahl himself. Critics, including some who serve with him, have called him a deserter who was captured because he abandoned his post, and called for him to be held to account for the deaths of 6 soldiers who were killed trying to rescue him. This isn't new. On Fox News in 2009, not long after Bergdahl was captured, retired Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters called the soldier a liar and suggested the Taliban would be doing the U.S. a favor by killing him.
If he walked away from his post and his buddies in wartime, I don't care how hard it sounds. As far as I'm concerned, the Taliban can save us a lot of legal hassles and legal bills.
Joining me now, Pentagon Press Secretary Rear Admiral John Kirby. And Admiral, let me begin by asking why now? I know negotiations had been ongoing for quite some time on this matter. What was the breakthrough that allowed Bowe Bergdahl to come home?
Well, there was I think the way I'd put this, Chris, was there was been a lot of effort over years and certainly recent months and weeks. But the real impetus to move as quickly as we did here was concerns that we had over Sergeant Bergdahl's health and his safety. So we knew that there was a brief window coming, and we took advantage of that as quickly as possible. But largely, the speed and the urgency with which we moved was a lot driven by his well-being.
Can you be any more specific about his health? I know it's been mentioned numerous times. Any sense of what kind of health challenges you were concerned about?
Yeah, I'm really not able to because he is an active duty living soldier. He has privacy rights that we just can't violate. But I would tell you that through a series of indications, we became increasingly concerned about his well-being and, of course, his safety in general. Not that we weren't always concerned about his safety in captivity, but in particular as things got to just recent weeks here. And without going into much more detail there in terms of the indications and the intelligence, I can tell you that we had very good reason to be so concerned, and that really is what drove the speed with which we moved.
There's been two lines of criticism in reaction to the announcement. The first has to do with the negotiation itself. There are politicians and others saying that the administration has negotiated with terrorists. It has violated some important American precedent. What's your response to that?
There was no negotiations with terrorists in this case. It was all the discussions were done through the government of Qatar. We're greatly appreciative for that. But there was no direct talks with the Taliban, no direct talks with the Afghani network. This was an arrangement, a transfer that was helpfully brokered by the Qatari government, and we're grateful for that.
And what about the assertion that Sergeant Bergdahl is a deserter, that he walked off the base, and that this was an extraordinary length to go to get back an American soldier who had abandoned his post? What do you say to that?
A couple of thoughts here, Chris. One, we don't know right now the exact circumstances under which he left that base. There was an investigation started, but they weren't able to complete it because, of course, the prime witness wasn't available and hasn't been available for the past 5 years. So we really don't know. Right now, our focus is not on that. It's not on how he left, and frankly, it's not even on how he became a captive of the Taliban. Our focus is on his health and safety and well-being, on getting him reintegrated back into society, back into the Army, and, of course, reunited with his family. But let me just back up and talk about a larger point here. When you join the military, when you put this uniform on, there's an understanding that if you're lost and you're taken captive, we're going to go to great lengths to get you back, because you belong inside the ranks, and we're going to go find you. We're going to get you. I grew up in the Navy. If you fall overboard on a ship, we don't ask whether you were pushed or whether you jumped. We turn the ship around and we go get you. Now, obviously, this is a more complicated circumstance because he was held captive. It's even more urgent when you are held captive by an enemy party that we're going to do all we can, and we're going to expend all our resources possible to go get you. And that's what we've done here. And I think it's a real testament to the institution of the military as itself, but also to the interagency and the whole government that have been applying so much energy over the last 5 years. We never forgot Sergeant Bergdahl, and I think this is a very good day for America to have him back inside the ranks.
Well, if I can editorialize for a moment, that seems to me a far more humane and sensible posture than some of your critics. Pentagon Press Secretary Rear Admiral John Kirby, thank you for your time. Joining me now, Rajiv Chandrasekaran, senior correspondent, associate editor of The Washington Post, author of Little America, The War Within the War for Afghanistan. Rajiv, have you been surprised by the level of controversy that has surrounded this announcement?
Well, certainly when you release Guantanamo detainees, you're bound to get some hooting and hollering from the right in this country. It's only natural. I would have thought there would have been more just genuine support for the fact that an American soldier is home. You know, the circumstances of his disappearance from that base are still very much in question, as Rear Admiral Kirby noted. We don't know all the facts. And to quickly brand him as a full-fledged deserter, I think, doesn't do justice to the due process that he's accorded, that we need to find out what really happened here. And quite frankly, Chris, the president has wanted to shut down Guantanamo. We are winding down the operation in Afghanistan. You know, we're going to keep that prison open indefinitely. Some of those folks have to be going back toward their home countries. And these guys were Taliban leaders. They weren't al-Qaeda leaders.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, I think, here. I mean, one of these guys, I think, was the governor of Herat province, right, under the Taliban. The Taliban ran a monstrous regime and of course tried to kill Americans and succeeded in killing lots of Americans. But they were not al-Qaeda, and they were not plotting explosions in Manhattan or flying planes into buildings. I mean, there is a distinction organizationally and I think even in terms of the laws of war between Taliban commanders and Taliban fighters and Taliban political officials, like some of those released today, and al-Qaeda operatives.
Indeed, Chris. I mean, look, these guys were bad guys. Let's make no mistake about it. Some of them were responsible for the slaughter of thousands of their fellow Afghans. And some of them did acquiesce to the presence of al-Qaeda in their country in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, and were probably sympathetic to Osama bin Laden. But to then say, you can't have discussions with any of them, you can't move in that direction, is quite frankly, ludicrous. This war has to end in some way. And
right.
If there's one disappointment in all this, Chris, it's that we didn't negotiate more directly with the Taliban. That's the only way that some elements of this war are going to draw to a close.
This is a key point, and I actually thought Rear Admiral John Kirby was a bit dissembling on this point, or at least obscuring the real point, where he says, well, the Qataris were actually the ones that took care of it. I mean, obviously, they were the intermediary go-between, but this was, whether the Qataris were running it, point on it or not, this was a negotiation with the Taliban over a prisoner swap, quite obviously.
Indeed, and let us hope that this is the opening chapter in what might be a more robust series of interactions between the United States government and the Taliban leadership over finding ways to end elements of the hostilities in Afghanistan. I'm not saying negotiate with all the Taliban factions. There's some that are still committed to support of al-Qaeda and transnational terrorism, but there are others whose aims are simply Afghan-focused. And it's been a long-standing goal of the Obama administration to find a way to get a negotiated settlement here as our troops are drawing down there. It's incumbent upon the United States to look for ways to find a negotiated peaceful settlement to this conflict. So the hope here is that this is a confidence-building measure that might get both sides together to start looking at other ways to find a more peaceful path forward in Afghanistan.
The final point I make here, you wrote an incredible book about the U.S. war in Iraq. And the surge, much beloved by those on the right and Republicans, a key strategic aspect was directly talking to people who months earlier had been blowing up American troops, shooting at them, ambushing them with IEDs and so forth. I mean, that was explicitly a strategic aim, was to bring those people off the insurgency. And so that was not condemned as essentially negotiating with terrorists in that case.
Hey, that's a great point, Chris, and that's because General David Petraeus, a hero to many on the right, was leading that effort in Iraq. And if you look, senior military commanders have been largely supportive of this move by the Obama administration. And let's not just describe this as a White House move. This was a Defense Department effort that was backed by the intelligence agencies of our government. Yep. This wasn't somebody in the White House just freelancing it.
Rajiv Chandrasekaran of the Washington Post, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
All right, we know what the reliable critics of the Obama administration are saying about the prisoner swap.
The worry now is because they are going to be back on the battlefield, and because, as well, we're negotiating with terrorists. This is going to just open a Pandora's box.
The real debate on the merits and risks of the Obama administration's move, that's next.